I want to begin by recognizing three of our distinguished elected officials who are here with us. And please hold your applause to the end. We've already seen Senator Brian Hughes, who very generously gave the invocation. We also are joined by Senator Larry Taylor and Senator Bob Hall. Are there any legislators that I missed? All right, well, round of applause, please. Thank you all, these public servants. It's something that was said of the president last night, but I think it's true of nearly everybody who goes into public service, particularly on the liberty side, that there are other things they could be doing with their time, treasure, and talent. So we're so grateful that they choose to spend all three on causes that benefit us and future generations. I want to introduce now the second video in our Forging Texas series. We're very proud of these. You know, one of the things that we have come to understand is that Texas history and Texas identity is under attack, and it's under attack for many of the same reasons that American history and American identity are under attack. And this attack is going to become more acute as our bicentennial approaches. Yes, it's crazy to say, but 2036 is just around the corner. It doesn't seem that way, but it is. It's going to be upon us before we know it. And so the question before us is, when we celebrate 200 years of Texas, will it be a time of celebration, like our centennial, or will it be a time of mourning, as the progressive left much prefers? Well, at TPPF, we know which we prefer. We prefer to celebrate Texas because Texas is worth celebrating. And the unique thing about Texas that is especially worth celebrating is our founding. The winning of Texas independence was an extension of the American Revolution, the same ideals and the same cause, against a different foe. And it is with that in mind that we have made our Forging Texas video series. This is the second episode. It's called Season of Defeat, in the dark days of the Texas Revolution. And the third one will debut shortly, Season of Victory, celebrating the victory at San Jacinto and beyond. Now, please join me in watching this new TPPF film. You are the premier audience. Thank you so much.
Charm from the sky seems to hollow us there. Each sea through the world is ne'er met with elsewhere. Home, home, sweet, sweet home. There's no
Easy, boy. That's what they want. I've seen them hands before. You got some mighty tender hands, son. The devil loves them scared tender.
They ain't afraid. Just allergic to all this singing. And what for? There's certainly nothing to praise on this Sunday.
The word is we're on the way to the coast. We ship back to the motherland. Our motherland. Yeah. Old Santa Ana, he may be vicious, but even he won't bully the rules of the war.
Silencio! 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 ¿Cuánto más, capitán?
Hay un seto, cerca del río.
Voy a preparar los hombres. General Urrea tenía razón. Esto no es justicia.
Eso es para el comandante supremo, para decidir.
Sí, capitán. ¡Carlos! Mueve a los prisioneros a posición y espera mi señal. No serás olvidado por tu compromiso de hoy.
¡Prepara a los prisioneros! ¡Prepara a los prisioneros!
¡Dispara a los prisioneros!
Hear what they say, boys! We'll give them hell tomorrow! Hell yeah! No more from that cottage again will I roam. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home.
When you got the stomach. What day is it? Tuesday. Are you the one that pulled me out of the river? I was saying. Farney. Oh my. Okay, so where's that son of a... I'm double now. Bled out. Didn't even make it half a mile. Any others? I saw a few make it to River's Edge. But after that, it's every man's own. There's a place above Victoria. Should be safer. You got plenty to eat for a few days while you heal. Travel by night if you can help me. And you? I got something in me now. Something. was savage what they did. I ain't never seen mud soaked red like that. Now they wept for their mothers. But you know what the worst part was? The sin. It smelled like rust, didn't it? Blood. This will no doubt haunt us in our dreams. But for their wives, for their children, they will feel it every second of every day. Santa Ana knows. He knows that fear cuts truer than bullet and blade. He wants us to run. So I won't. What about you?
About that video momentarily, but first, please join me in congratulating Josh Trevino for all the great work that he's done at TPPF for many years. Thank you, Josh. Of the many things for which Josh deserves credit, and I told him I'd handle MC duties the second half of the lunch so he can sit in the back and let his head swell, but all kidding aside is true, is along with our filmmaker, Stephen Robinson, whom I introduced yesterday, coming up with this idea. Because it's not the easiest thing when you're a think tank, a policy advocacy group, to say, we're going to do a 10-episode, multi-million-dollar history series. But because of the credibility of this organization and other arenas and the generosity of many people in this room, we've been able to do it. Yes, thank you. And as I was sitting at lunch watching this video for just the third time, this is hot off the presses, and there might be a couple of tweaks before we go public. It's very, very well done. We wanted to be sure and show it to you so you know where we're going. And it occurred to me, all of that praying so many of us have been doing since Election Day, some of us together, about what we do in our season of defeat to turn it into a season of victory, is encapsulated in that video. The timing I am going to submit to you is providential. Seasons of defeat really stink. Seasons of defeat sting. Seasons of defeat get really ugly. And yet what I can tell you as a historian, someone who has taught Texas history many times, that next episode, titled Season of Victory, is going to be our roadmap forward out of our current season of defeat. And I'll just say, it's also fitting, if you know Texas history, we've relied on people from other states to come in and remind us how good we have it. And also to work shoulder to shoulder with us as we charge that next hill for freedom and for human flourishing. And finally, before I introduce our keynote speaker, whom I know you're anxious to hear from, it's also fitting to say that the people who enjoy the American dream most profoundly happen to live in the two states of Texas in Florida. How fitting it is that our speaker today leads the state of Florida. How fitting it is that he was a member of Congress, a veteran, Navy SEAL. How fitting it is that his wife Casey is here with him, because part of charging the hill and succeeding is attending to our families and communities. And how fitting it is that right in the middle of this conference, when yesterday I promised you that when you leave here tomorrow, you're going to be more optimistic than when you showed up, that our keynote speaker at today's luncheon is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it, y'all. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, appreciate it very much. It's great to be in Texas. I'm one of the Floridians that does wear cowboy boots every day, so I fit right in, and I appreciate the dedication to freedom. You know, Florida, we are a competitor state in terms of the freedom sweepstakes. I will say, on behalf of my state, we have the greatest beaches in the United States. We have the greatest theme parks, greatest fishing, greatest boating, and now, I think after 2020, I can say, we do one of the best jobs of counting votes in the United States, and you were never able to say that about Florida before this year. I'd also like to recognize our great First Lady of Florida, Casey, my wife. She does a fantastic job and is involved in a whole host of things to better serve the state of Florida, particularly our young people, particularly folks struggling with mental illness. And it's not that easy. We are the first family in modern Florida history to have 3 young children. So we have a 4-year-old daughter, a son that's going to be 3 at the end of March, and a newborn that's going to be 1 at the end of March. And so crisscrossing the state, doing budget, doing all this, people say, oh, you know, you need to go home and rest. Just understand, there's no rest in our household. All we're trying to do is prevent all the historical artifacts that are there in Florida history from being destroyed because these kids have a mind of their own. But it's great to be here, and I do think we were proud of how we did the election in 2020. If you look at other states, and I give Texas credit for doing it, but many other states had a lot of problems and obviously sapped a lot of confidence. But we didn't do it by accident. When I became governor, one of the first things I did was accept the resignation of Brenda Snipes as the supervisor of Broward County down in South Florida, and then removed the supervisor of election in Palm Beach County. So those have been 2 of the counties that had historically had a lot of election problems. There were new people in there, a new team. We also made sure that we didn't do any of these changes that any of the other states were doing. So we do have an absentee vote. You request it, they send it to you, and you send it in. But there's no mass mailing of ballots where they're just floating around in the ether. We don't allow ballot harvesting in the state of Florida. And we track every single person or ballot that is actually submitted in real time. So the morning of the actual election day, I could tell you precisely how many registered Democrats had voted early or absentee, how many independents had done the same, and how many Republicans. And as the election day was going on, I could tell you, hey, at 10 o'clock, we've already had 6,000 Republicans vote in Collier County every single time. And then when the election stops, you know how many ballots are out there? Everything's transparent, everything's counted, and we had 99% of it counted by midnight on election night. So we wanted to run it well. We also wanted to have good results, and I would say Florida had some of the best results from a conservative perspective of any place in the country. President carried the state by almost 400,000 votes. We were able to defeat 2 Democratic incumbent members of Congress. We were able to, even though Eric Holder and Obama spent millions and millions of dollars to try to turn the Florida House of Representatives red to blue, we gained 5 seats in the Florida House of Representatives. And even though they tried the same in the Florida Senate, and we actually have a Democratic map that we run under, we gained an additional seat in the Florida Senate. So we have strong majorities in both chambers and really look forward to what 2022 holds in store for us. Now, you can have a good election system, you can have transparency, you can put good people in, but the law's got to be followed. And I think what we saw in some of these other states, places like Pennsylvania, it wasn't really the legislature that was doing it. The court was rewriting the law. They even said you can have a ballot come in after the election with no postmark, and it counts if it gets there within a certain number of days. And so that had always been a problem in Florida with the courts. If you remember Bush versus Gore, the reason that became the fiasco that it was because we had a very liberal activist Florida Supreme Court that was constantly rewriting the law and trying to engineer a victory for their preferred candidate, Al Gore. And one of the reasons I ran for governor was because that liberal majority, even in 2018, was still in existence. They were still rewriting Florida law. They were still rewriting the Florida Constitution. But a 4-3 split, 4 liberal, 3 conservatives. When I was running, I knew the time I took office, 3 of the liberals' terms would expire, mandatory retirement age, and that giving the new governor, me, the ability to replace 3 liberal activist jurists with 3 solid constitutional conservatives on the Florida Supreme Court. And in doing that, we transformed probably the most liberal court in the country into probably the most conservative court in the country. Maybe we can compare with Texas, but they're pretty doggone strong. And so we were proud of that. It's an important thing to do. And I can tell you this, they don't even try to bring these cases in Florida courts, any type of things where they want an activist decision, because they know it's going to get to the Supreme Court and they are going to lose. And so that's very good for the liberties of the people of Florida. One of the things we also did when I got in was make sure that the rule of law applies writ large. And so after a decade of haggling and not being able to get it done, we were able to ban sanctuary cities in the state of Florida, statewide. Not going to take any no for an answer on that. And we got huge support, not only in the legislature, but from the public, across party lines, across any type of lines you want. People wanted the rule of law upheld. They did not want to see any of these local jurisdictions become sanctuary jurisdictions. So we were proud of that. We were also proud of the fact that when you started to see all the rioting over the summer and the disorder and the looting, that we didn't let that happen in the state of Florida. As soon as we saw what was going on, I immediately activated the Florida National Guard. We also had some of the special forces units from the Florida Highway Patrol, and we worked with our sheriff's departments locally, the police departments, said, we're not going to do that here in Florida. If you loot, you lose. If you riot, you're going to go to jail. We had it. We were able to keep it buttoned up. But I also said at the time, this is happening in our country, and obviously we've seen recently it's not limited to one viewpoint, and we can't allow it. We can't play whack-a-mole. Anytime someone gets mad at something, they're going to try to burn down someone's business or cause some type of riot or tumult. And so a couple months ago, I was the first governor in the country to propose the strongest anti-rioting, anti-looting, pro-law enforcement legislation in the country, which said a number of important things. One is to any local jurisdiction in Florida, if you want to defund law enforcement, okay, the state is going to take funding away from you. We're not going to let you cut off your nose to spite your face and put your citizens at risk by taking away money from the hardworking men and women in law enforcement. We also said if you assault a police officer, if you loot someone's business, if you do any type of destruction, I don't want you to get arrested, mugshot, and then put back on the street and not have any penalties. You are going to jail. That is going to happen if you do that in the state of Florida. And guess what? If they were to do that in a place like Portland, if you actually went to jail when you did this instead of just get put back in circulation, you would see far fewer people out there rioting in Portland. And that's what we're saying, sending the message in the state of Florida. Don't even try to do it, but if you do it, you're going to learn what an inside of a jail cell feels like, and I doubt that that's something that you're going to want to do lightly. So that'll be one of the major pieces of legislation that we take up in this upcoming legislative session. Ours starts in March, and I think you're going to see broad support for that. And I made the point recently, I don't care who you're rioting in favor of. I don't care the banner. I don't want it. I want it stopped in this country, and that's what we're looking to do. We also had, we're proud to say that, and I think Texas has by and large done a good job as well, but I think that this whole year has been permeated by the response to COVID, or last year, 2020, of course, into 2021. Florida is open. Our schools are open. Every parent in the state of Florida has a right to send their child to in-person instruction. Public school, charter school, private school, it doesn't matter. All businesses have a right to operate. They're open. Every citizen has a right to work and earn a living, regardless what any local government may tell them. We have no restrictions and mandates from the state of Florida whatsoever. We trust individuals. We give them the information. People in Florida understand, the risk. They make decisions and they take the proper precautions for themselves. And I can tell you, the way you've seen some of these other states engage in lockdowns, keep schools closed, even in the face of all available evidence. Look, whatever happened in March or April, you can kind of get a mulligan on that. There was not a lot, there wasn't as much information. I mean, I still think there was a lot of mistakes made, but still. But at this point, to keep schools closed when every single study that's been done in real time in the United States, in Europe, and everywhere in between has said that schools are not high risk for spread of COVID, and yet they continue to do it. There are places in this country where the kids are not going to go back in person until the fall of 2021. So we had a decision to make in Florida. We needed to get them back in. It was very clear as we got into May that this was something that needed to happen. We had the teachers union suing us to close the schools, but we made the decision, all the schools are going to open. Parents have the choice. If you want to do virtual, fine. Now we make them now sign something to acknowledge that virtual is not good, and if you're keeping your kid in, you need to know that. But we said we need to get the kids back in school. They tried to shut down sports and athletics, both at the college and the high school level. Many of you probably remember that. We told all our universities in Florida, SEC, ACC, you're playing, we're going to play, and we just crowned a national champion. Unfortunately, Alabama, again, who takes a lot of our players, down in Miami at Hard Rock Stadium. And so the high school sports, they wanted to shut down. I said, not on my watch, you're not. I'm not going to take away something that these kids have worked for their whole life, whether it's football, volleyball, you name it. They have a right to play. If the parent doesn't want them to play, then that's fine. Nobody is saying you have to play. And so we were able in December to have all classifications of the high school football championships played at Doak Campbell Stadium in Tallahassee. We crowned state championships. When I'd speak to the players, some of them I would go to some of the games, speak to them, and I said, this is a great opportunity for you. You've worked hard, but also understand, if you were in Los Angeles right now, you would not be at Doak Campbell Stadium. You'd be on your couch because they are forbidding you from playing sports. And so we led, people complained. Obviously, the media is always going to do what they're going to do, try to scare parents. But right now, because obviously it was the right decision, if you tried to close schools, there would be riots from the parents. They want the kids in school. It was the right decision, and it's a decision that all these states should be making. I hear Biden say, within 100 days, we should have elementary schools open. I'm like, these things should have been open 200 days ago. Are you kidding me? But what he's basically going to do is he's going to say, well, you need this, you need that, you need all these other things. By the time we get to the end of the spring, the semester is basically going to be over, and it's going to push all this into the fall. He is putting special interests ahead of the interests of hardworking parents and these young school kids. And of all the things I've disagreed with people in politics about, I think how people like Biden and these unions have behaved with schools is among the most disgraceful things I have ever seen. Keeping schools closed for a year and a half is one of the biggest policy blunders in the history of our country. We didn't make that mistake in Florida. You didn't make that mistake in Texas. So we have schools open. We have businesses open. They try to always single out the restaurants. Our restaurants are up. They're running. They have people coming in. Some of these restaurants are as clean as they take all kind of precautions. They're doing a great job. People are happy to be able to work. We have our theme parks. All that stuff is all going. And yet, no lockdowns, no mandates, schools open, businesses open. Florida, despite having the most vulnerable population to COVID in the United States. We are less than the national average in per capita mortality for COVID, and we are currently 26 out of 50. 25 other states, almost all of them lockdown states, have higher per capita mortality than the state of Florida. The lockdowns don't work. Not only are they destructive, not only do they ruin people's lives, they do not on their own terms mitigate this virus. And so we understood that. We didn't view it as a viable strategy. We've instead decided to focus on our vulnerable populations, whether that's providing protections very early on in nursing homes. For example, we had the first policy that prevented hospitals from discharging infectious COVID-positive patients back into nursing homes because we understood the type of tinderbox that would be by infecting some of these vulnerable folks. We did a whole bunch of things throughout the pandemic to be able to guard our most vulnerable, and then now we are prioritizing our elderly for vaccination against the initial recommendations of the expert class and the CDC. And we're doing really good on that. But I would tell you with the lockdowns, you look at a place like LA County, most locked down, any closures, no schools, mask penalties, anything you can think of. LA County in the last 6 weeks has higher cases on a daily basis and hospitalizations than the entire state of Florida does. And we're 22 million people. So you have the one county with the most draconian restrictions, and yet the COVID has done worse than a state that's completely open. I don't know that these experts will ever admit the lockdowns don't work. I sure as hell don't think the media will ever admit the lockdowns don't work. But the fact of the matter is, we're at the point now where you cannot possibly say that this is a good policy unless you just simply toss aside every piece of data that we've accumulated over these last 9 or 10 months. And so we're open, we're free, and we're better off because of it, both in terms of COVID and in terms of every other aspects of life that makes society worth living. We also have a situation in terms of our vaccine. I think many of you know, but it didn't get as much play as it should have. The issue was, how do you distribute the vaccine? Who do you prioritize for the vaccine? And initially, I think everyone thought, or certainly I did, because of the toll that we've seen in nursing homes and long-term care facilities, that we wanted to vaccinate, to offer it to those residents. We don't mandate vaccine in Florida. Like, it's your choice on this, but we wanted to offer it to the residents, offer it to the staff, and then offer it to, as most people were doing, some of the people that work with COVID patients, doctors, nurses, and the like. And so there was kind of broad agreement on that. Then the question is, what do you do next? And CDC had an advisory committee, and their initial recommendation was the next is, quote, essential workers, many of them who are very young, and no access for the elderly population at all. And part of the reason, they said, was, someone was quoted in the New York Times saying, well, the elderly are, quote, too white. They're not diverse enough. And so we want to focus on these workers, even though the workers are at much less risk than the elderly. So there was blowback to that, deservedly so, because I think it was not based on medical science. It was based more on ideology and politics. And so they had to change the recommendation. And they said, well, we're going to do essential workers, which is a lot of people, and you can do 75 and plus. And so, again, that would mean a 20-year-old healthy worker working at a grocery store would get the vaccine before a 74-year-old grandfather or grandmother. That is not good science. That's not evidence-based. And so I was one of the first, I think we were the first, to officially reject the CDC's recommendation. We said we are not going to do young workers ahead of elderly people. We're putting seniors first, so 65 and up is going to be our target population for the vaccine. And so at this point, having now done that, we are probably close to 450,000 seniors who have received the coronavirus vaccine. We're ahead of everyone else by a country mile. 60-some% of our vaccines have gone to people 65 and up, and that's growing rapidly every day. But this group of people, 65 and up, represents 82% of all COVID-related mortality. And so if you're vaccinating those folks in large numbers, you are going to see the mortality decline if it's a 95% efficacy. If you're doing young people who are healthy, maybe that will prevent them from spreading it, but those are people that have close to a 0% chance of dying with COVID. And so we made the decision based on science and data. Of course, when we did it, the media's like, oh, he doesn't listen to experts. He's not doing this. Yeah, you're right. When they're wrong, I'm going to reject it. And we're going to do what's right. But the funny thing is now the CDC is telling people to do 65 and plus. Yeah, you want to be like Florida. And I think part of the reason was just the fact that, I've got folks showing up. I use my supermarkets, the pharmacies there. People can do drive-in. The Villages retirement community the other day, we opened a big drive-through vaccination site. Normally, they would do their golf carts, but it's a little cold right now in that part of Florida, and so they're there in their cars getting it. It's a 30, 40-minute evolution. People are really happy about it, but they have friends in other states. And there are other states where seniors weren't even eligible to get an appointment, much less actually get a shot unless you were in a nursing home. And so we're showing that we're prioritizing our vulnerable population. I can do a lot of vaccine right now. We've got a good, when the media will talk about the U.S. isn't using all, just understand, by the time they allocate something, it's a couple more days before it's even received and then applied, and then the reporting lags 72 hours or more a lot of times. And so if you look at what is reported right now, understand there's probably tens of thousands of more people that have actually gotten the shot that will then be reported in the coming days. So I can tell you we did 340,000 from last Monday through this past Sunday in a week, and that's more than the allocations we're getting on a given week, and we're going to be able to continue to do that. But I guarantee you, and Texas is focusing on elderly too, the states that focus on the vulnerable, getting it to elderly, putting seniors first, we are going to see more of a reduction in mortality than the states that are focusing on putting young folks first. And a lot of that is because of politics, because of special interest and where they're at with that. So putting seniors first is the right thing to do. It's evidence-based. It was not, repeat, not what our expert class told us to do, but now people are following Florida's lead because it was the right thing to do. So we're optimistic about where we're going from here. I think that we were able to keep hundreds of thousands of people employed. We were able to keep over 1 million students in school, and we're able to focus on our vulnerable population. So the question is, what are some of the things at the state level that we need to be thinking about? And I know people in Texas are thinking about a lot of this as well. When I think about what you can do on a state level, there are some states that I can simply look to and do the opposite of what they do, and I'll be in really good shape. And then there's a few, and Texas is one of the few, where I can look to and say, okay, what are they doing that we not be? What can we learn from Texas? What are they doing? And I think you'll see probably a lot of agreement on some of these issues about where we need to go. The first is, this was this coronavirus was in some ways, we were monitoring it in January, so we know it was an issue and we followed it, but to be dealing with it to then all of a sudden have all this stuff the world be shut down, that was a pretty dramatic turn. And I think it's caused a lot of us to look and say, okay, what type of powers does the government actually have to act unilaterally in a, quote, emergency? And you have some states in this country that are basically asserting the authority to keep people shut down and locked down indefinitely. I don't think that that's a legitimate use of government to do these indefinite lockdowns. That has destroyed people's lives. It's ruined people's businesses. You had many of these states across the country that were closing houses of worship. You even had some where you could go to a strip club, but you weren't allowed to attend religious services. Really? How does that work? And of course, we've had schools shuttered in many parts of this country with no end in sight of that. In the state of Florida, our local governments have certain authorities. They derive it from statute in the Constitution. Governor has certain authorities. There was never any need to, quote, for the legislature to rein me in because I was very attentive to what was any problematic nature of the mitigation. But I can tell you, had my election gone a different way, Florida would look a lot different right now. We would have no kids in school. We would have businesses shut down. Our unemployment would be 12%, and there would probably be no end in sight. And so we have to look at this and say, okay, what's the proper structure? I don't say there's never, look, we have a hurricane state. I have to act in emergency. But it's one thing to, waive a regulation about, bringing fuel in or do something like that. to then affirmatively go and say someone can't operate their place of business. And so we're going to be looking at ways to provide protections for people. I think there absolutely needs to be that. And I think under no circumstances should government be able to do any indefinite closure or lockdowns. You need to get approval, legislative approval from the legislature if you're going to be taking actions like that. So our legislature's looking at that. I want to be a part of that because, the next pandemic, who knows who will be governor at that time. And we're also looking at that at the local level, and I know they're looking at that in the state of Texas as well. Some of these people, especially these local officials I see around the country, they just really love wielding power over people. It was really disturbing to watch some of the stuff that they were doing and how absolutely absurd and arbitrary some of these rules were, and yet that's somehow there and it can't be questioned. And the courts were very reluctant to get in for months and months. Now they feel a little bit better about it, but they were no help to anyone in the first 5 or 6 months of the pandemic. And isn't it funny how the politicians and the elected officials or the health officials who are the most likely to want to lock you down, who are the most likely to want to wave their finger in your face and tell you you're not behaving, as soon as that camera's off, they're on a plane and they're going to Mexico to party, or they're going somewhere else to party. These people are hypocrites. The other issue that we had been planning on addressing, but I think it's become much, much more pressing since the beginning of January, is the role of big tech in our society. You have a situation where in the election, I was very disturbed to see credible articles about Hunter Biden actively suppressed by these big tech oligarchs in a way that I think absolutely had an impact on the presidential election. And so I'm thinking to myself, if one of you, and I was running and you have me over, I'm running for governor, you have me over, you do something, that would be a contribute. Whatever you're doing would be considered an in-kind contribution or an actual contribution. And yet, big tech, they could actually suppress this information, and that is just simply okay. That is election interference, if you want to be honest about it, and that's something that really needs to be addressed. And so I thought that was important. It bothered me. We were working on ways, what can we do to protect people on that? And then what you've seen so far in January, I think is really, really chilling. Now, what Twitter did to the president, he's the president of the United States, that's obviously a big deal, and I don't want to minimize that. But I can tell you what really bothered me was how they decapitated this company, Parler. You have this, it always said, hey, it's a market. You don't like Twitter, create your own competitor. Well, they did that. And then what happened? When it came time, when Parler was gaining all these users because people understood that Twitter was censoring conservative speech and basically siding with the incoming administration against the outgoing, people started taking their business there. And so what did they do? Not only did Apple drop them, not only did you have other things, they took them off the web server from Amazon. The lawyers quit. They couldn't even do this. This was a coordinated assault on a company that was trying to compete. And so I think about that and say, okay, if they can do that, that means the big tech oligarchy is in some ways, in many ways, more powerful than the government itself. You're serving as judge, jury, and executioner with no due process, and you could effectively wipe someone's livelihood right off the map. Just think about someone that has a business where they use the internet to sell things and social media to advertise, and they have text messaging and email and all this stuff. And then they were at a Trump rally 6 months ago, and that upset some woke staffers at Facebook or one of these tech companies. And so then they say, we've got to silence this person. And so then the social media does it, and then they take away their text, and then they take away their email. That could totally ruin somebody's existence. And so what's the due process for that? So I think that there needs to be protections for people. I don't think we can have a couple of these far left-wing tech oligarchs control the flow of information in our country. I'm not going to accept that, and I don't think any of you are going to accept that. So we're thinking through what we can do to provide people some protections. But just think about when you're doing like a campaign, you're sending emails out, you're doing text messaging, you obviously do social media, you do all these things. What's to stop them in October of 2022 coming into Texas and saying they don't like one of the candidates, and they're just going to deplatform them off everything. What would the recourse be? I'm not sure there's any recourse right now under law. Even if there was, by the time you sued, it wouldn't be done and wouldn't make much of a difference. And so they have really opened, I think, Pandora's box on this. And I was somebody that even before this was concerned about it. I supported the 230, all that stuff when I was in Congress to repeal it. But I think we're in uncharted waters. And I think we need to really think deeply about if we are a disfavored class based on our principles, based on having conservative views, based on being a Christian, based on whatever you can say that is not favored in Silicon Valley, and if we can be shut up and we can be deplatformed, that is, yes, they're not under the First Amendment traditionally because they're not government, but that is, to me, implicating core First Amendment freedoms and values. And I want a society in which we have a robust flow of information. And so we're going to take action. I think you're going to see Texas want to take action. I doubt you're going to see very much from the federal government in terms of taking action, but it's an issue that's not going to go away. So we're thinking very, very deeply about this. I think it's probably the most important legislative issue that we're going to have to get right this year and next year. And in Florida, we're in the fight. I mean, we want to be a part of the solution. Another thing that we're going to continue to do, and I think Texas is obviously prided on it, is we're a fiscally responsible state. Obviously, we have no income tax and all that, but in terms of how we spend money, we provide better services at lower prices than most of our peer states. For example, New York, we have 3 million more people in Florida now than the state of New York does, and yet New York state budget is twice the size of Florida's budget. $184 billion, and ours is $92 billion. And yet, I think if you talk to people that move from there to Florida and ask them, well, what about the roads? What about the infrastructure? 90% will say, oh, it's much better in Florida. How about getting your driver's license? Oh, it took me 3 minutes to go to the DMV. That would never have happened where I came from. So we're providing the services that you want. We focus on things like infrastructure. We focus things on water quality because it's such an important part of our state with our fishing and boating and everything. And we focus on those core things, but we're not spending extravagantly at all. And in fact, during this, when the pandemic hit, I had a budget sitting on my desk that had been done basically a week before everything stopped. Back then, I mean, the second week of March, Fauci was saying, go on cruises, sneeze into your elbow. And then it went from that for him saying that everything needed to shut. So it happened very quickly. The legislature, I think they did the right thing. They weren't assuming that the world was going to stop. But I had to say, okay, the world is stopping. My theme parks have decided to close. I have other people canceling vacations. This is something that's really, really serious. That's going to impact our bottom line. There's no question about it. So if you look at when that budget was then finally on my desk, I vetoed a Florida record $1 billion in line item vetoes right off the top of the budget. And then we basically withheld enough money so that the decline in revenue, we would still be running a balanced budget. And I'm happy to report we have not, during the pandemic, had to touch 1 red cent in our rainy day fund during this whole time because we were able to make tough decisions at the outset. And today, we look at going forward where we're going to be. We're going to be able to make it work in Florida. Our revenue has been better every single month than what they had forecast back in April. And I think that's just a fact that we wanted people to be working. We wanted people to be able to make the most of their own lives. And people are responding in kind. I can tell you that the number of people that have come to Florida just in the past few months, it's amazing how many of them are fleeing lockdown states specifically. How many people, and I never encountered this before this fall, how many people would tell me, you know, I was in this city, the schools are closed, or they can only go in person 1 day a week. So I said, forget it. This is the time. We're out. We're coming to Florida. I have my kid in school, and you know what? What I noticed, the kids are happy. The people in Florida are much happier. You're living with the virus, but you're not letting the virus dominate every aspect of your life. And so we continue to see that. So I think as we think about 2021, some of the important issues that are going to be at play, you're going to see states, I think, that focused on evidence-based approaches to responding to the pandemic, believed in people having the right to work, believed in businesses having the right to operate, believe in kids needing to be able to go to school in person, you're going to see us, I think, come out of the gates much quicker than many of these other states that have been mired in lockdowns for the last 9 or 10 months. And so I view Texas as a healthy competition between the two of us. We certainly are going to continue to look for Texas to see some of the things that work, and hopefully Texas will also look to the state of Florida. But I think that as we look forward, it's, when you don't have a good election outcome, it's frustrating. And I was obviously frustrated. I was happy with what we did in Florida, not as happy with what I saw in some other parts of the country. And then to have the Georgia races go the way they did was like kind of salt in the wounds at that point, and very disappointing. Although I told my wife when the results came in, I was like, if I were, what this is going to mean now is, as a governor, they are going to try to send the states a lot of money because they want to send the money to New York and California or whatever. And so I was like, they're probably going to do something that if I was in Congress, I would have voted against. But if they're going to send me money, we're happy to take it, and we'll put it to good use, probably beef up our budget reserves. But it was a disappointing election in Georgia as well. So now we're faced with a situation where you're going to see potentially them have more ability to do some of the really aggressive things that we didn't think was possible the morning after the election, because I think we all just assumed, that we were going to hold the Senate. And so I think that means people need to have resolve. I think you need to stay in the fight. And obviously, by you guys being here, you're going to be in the fight. Stand for the key principles that have made the country great. But I think that when you have adversity, that can spawn some opportunity. And I think particularly in the states that are really embracing our role, like we are in Florida, as being one of the free states in this country, I think we're going to have the opportunity to do some great things in 2022 and beyond. And there's always a way you can look at it half empty, half full. I tend to be more of an optimist. Whenever I kind of get a little discouraged, I always think back to the Constitutional Convention. Many of you studied it. They needed a constitution, but it just wasn't happening for a few weeks in that thing. They just couldn't agree. There were all these different issues. Things that we take for granted. They didn't even know whether the president would be a single person or not. They were fighting over representation, all these things. And there were a number of times when the whole thing could have just run aground. And yet they were able to persevere. They were able to broker compromises, and they were able to arrive at what I think is the best frame for government that's ever been devised. And so as they're doing that, and as they finish it, and as the delegates are all signing it, Benjamin Franklin stands up in the middle of the hall, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and he points to the front of the room where George Washington sat. Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention, and he said, I've been looking at the president's chair during the whole time of this convention, and the chair had basically half of a sun peeking up off the back of the chair. And he's like, I've been looking at that sun, and I've been trying for the life of me to figure out whether that was a rising sun or a setting sun. And in many times when they looked like they were going to run aground, he thought maybe it was a setting sun, but he said no. He's like, I'm more convinced than ever that that's a rising sun, that we've endured a lot, but we are a free people. We have a frame of government that can propel us forward, and America is going to succeed as an idea and as a country, and I view that to be the same. I think the sun is rising for our country. I don't think it rises without complications. I think we've got a lot of significant issues. We've had a lot of tough times in this country, but they were right when they founded the country. The people that have stood for those principles have ultimately been have been shown to be right. And I think all of us, by standing firm on these founding principles, the conservative ideas that have made the country great, we are going to lead the resurgence for this country 2022 and beyond. So God bless the great state of Texas for being one of the anchors. Florida, we're right there with you, and we're going to have people choosing between Texas and Florida. I think that's a decision that's going to be happening all across the country in living rooms, all over some of these poorly run states, Texas or Florida, Texas and Florida. We'll win some, you'll lose some, but we'll both be in the fight together. Thank you, guys. God bless. Thanks.
Governor, I'd say we'll make you an adopted Texan, but that'll change some of your sales pitches. Thanks so much for that inspiration. Folks, you know, 24 hours ago, we said we were going to be inspired. Obviously, we got that from our friend, the governor of Florida. Thanks so much, Governor Ron DeSantis, Mrs. DeSantis, for being here with us. We'll make you an adopted Texan, too. And you're in for the rest of the day, a real treat. We have some excellent panels. I was able to sit in on a few of our panels up to this point. Great job, moderators, panelists, legislators. This is the beginning of the legislature. It's so kind of you to be here with your time, but we know what's at stake. And while we need to be very serious, perhaps even somber sometimes about what's at stake, we ought to have smiles on our faces because we know we're going to win. Enjoy this afternoon. We'll be back here at 5 with our governor, Governor Greg Abbott. And of course, we've got a full day in store tomorrow. God bless you.